Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari. Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Vaidvyasa kṣatriya. Asto Dharasthata Sri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the sum of the devotees. All glories to the sum of the devotees. All glories to the sum of the devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Padaya Padaya Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bhuchani Visheshanyavadi Pastatari Shatari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Dojayamudhirayat Nasta Prayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. Today being the disappearance of Srila Jagannathas Babaji Maharaj and Rasikananda Prabhu Thakur, we're going to go through the verse a little bit quicker than normal, so we can save some time to hear some nectar about some of these great Vaishnavas that we don't hear a lot about. But there's some very, very beautiful and ecstatic descriptions about them. So reading from chapter 3, third canto, chapter 29, entitled Explanation of Devotional Service, text number 15. Niṣevitena niṣevitenānimittena sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā kriyā-yogena śastena kriyā-yogena śastena nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ niṣevitenānimittena sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā kriyā-yogena śastena nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ niṣevitenānimittena sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā kriyā-yogena śastena nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ niṣevitenānimittena sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā kriyā-yogena śastena nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ Ladies? Niṣevitenānimittena sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā kriyā-yogena śastena nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ niṣevitenānimittena sva-dharmeṇa mahīyasā kriyā-yogena śastena nātihiṁsreṇa nityaśaḥ niṣevitena executed animittena without attachment to the result. Sva-dharmeṇa by one's prescribed duties. Mahīyasā glorious. Kriyā-yogena by devotional activities. Śastena auspicious. Na without. Atihiṁsreṇa excessive violence. Nityaśaḥ regularly. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. A devotee must execute his prescribed duties which are glorious without material profit. Without excessive violence, one should regularly perform one's devotional activities. Purport. One has to execute his prescribed duties according to his social position as a brāhmaṇa, kṣatriya, vaiśya, or śūdra. The prescribed duties of the four classes of men in human society are also described in Bhagavad-gītā. The activities of brāhmanas are to control the senses and to become simple, clean, learned devotees. The kṣatriya has the spirit for ruling. They are not afraid on the battlefield, and they are charitable. The vaiśyas, or the mercantile class of men, trade in commodities, protect cows, and develop agricultural produce. The śūdras, or laborer class, serve the higher classes because they themselves are not very intelligent. From every position, as confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā, sva-dharmeṇa tam abhyarcha, one can serve the Supreme Lord by performing one's prescribed duty. It is not that only the brāhmanas can serve the Supreme Lord and not the śūdras. Anyone can serve the Supreme Lord by performing his prescribed duties under the direction of a spiritual master or representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No one should think that his prescribed duties are inferior. A brāhmana can serve the Lord by using his intelligence, and the kṣatriya can serve the Supreme Lord by using his military arts, just as Arjuna served Krishna. Arjuna was a warrior. He had no time to study Vedanta or other highly intellectual books. The damsels in Brajdam were girls born of the vaiśya class, and they engaged in protecting cows and producing agriculture. Krishna's foster father, Nanda Maharaj, and his associates were all vaiśyas. They were not at all educated, but they could serve Krishna by loving him and by offering everything to him. Similarly, there are many instances in which chandalas, or those lower than śūdras, have served Krishna. Also, the sage Vidura was considered a śūdra because his mother happened to be śūdra. There are no distinctions, for it is declared by the Lord in Bhagavad-gītā that anyone engaged specifically in devotional service is elevated to the transcendental position without a doubt. Everyone's prescribed duty is glorious if it is performed in devotional service of the Lord without desire for profit. Such loving service must be performed without reason, without impediment, and spontaneously. Krishna is lovable, and one has to serve him in whatever capacity one can. That is pure devotional service. Another significant phrase in this verse is nātihiṁsreṇa, with minimum violence or sacrifice of life. Even if a devotee has to commit violence, it should not be done beyond what is necessary. Sometimes the question is put before us, quote, "You ask us not to eat meat, but you are eating vegetables. Do you think that is not violence?" End of quote. The answer is that eating vegetables is violence, and vegetarians are also committing violence against other living entities because vegetables also have life. Non-devotees are killing cows, goats, and so many other animals for eating purposes. And a devotee who is vegetarian is also killing. But here, significantly, it is stated that every living entity has to live by killing another entity. That is the law of nature, jivasa jiva jivanam. One living entity is the life for another living entity. But for a human being, that violence should be committed only as much as necessary. A human being is not to eat anything which is not offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jagna śastena shanta. One becomes freed from all sinful reactions by eating foodstuffs which are offered to yajna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A devotee therefore eats only prasad, or foodstuffs offered to the Supreme Lord. And Krishna says that when a devotee offers him foodstuffs from the vegetable kingdom with devotion, he eats that. A devotee is to offer to Krishna foodstuffs prepared from vegetables. If the Supreme Lord wanted foodstuffs prepared from animal food, the devotee could offer this, but he does not order to do that. We have to commit violence. That is a natural law. We should not, however, commit violence extravagantly, but only as much as ordered by the Lord. Arjuna engaged in the art of killing, and although killing is, of course, violence, he killed the enemy simply on Krishna's order. In the same way, if we commit violence as it is necessary by the order of the Lord, that is called nātihiṁsreṇa. We cannot avoid violence, for we are put into a conditional life in which we have to commit violence. But we should not commit more violence than necessary or than ordered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tasmai śūdra. Guru divachalam pankam langayate girimerkita vande sigram dīrataranam. Chaturvarnamaya guna karma vibhagasa. Krishna explains very nicely in Bhagavad-gītā that that he's created a very nice system in which everyone can live very comfortably. May not always be happy, but at least it's the other way around, actually. You may not be always comfortable, but you at least will be happy. Right? Even as devotees, sometimes we have to perform many services which are very challenging, and we may not be so inclined to do them for various reasons. But because it's for Krishna, the devotee can still be happy and perform them. One has to execute his prescribed duties according to his social position. Prabhupada very nicely describes here that there are different social orders. We all know that. Even though in the mundane world it may not be so obvious as it was in former times, but there again are classes of people who are Brahminical or teachers, intellectuals. There are those who are administrative, the kṣatriyas, those who are more business inclined, and those who are better to just offer some service. At least do something. Serve the others. And these prescribed duties, when they're performed to satisfy the Supreme Lord, Krishna explains in Bhagavad-gītā, Prabhupada quotes that verse from the 18th chapter, right? Sva-dharmeṇa tam abhyartscha siddhim vindati manava, that by worship of the Supreme Lord, one can attain perfection through performing his own work. That's the bottom line, is that it has to be for the purpose of satisfying the Supreme Lord. But society is divided. It may not be so obvious, but in Vedic culture, in times of yore, Prabhupada sometimes says, in days of yore, in the past, that was more obvious, right? Samodhamastam tapaksaucham shantir arjam eva jnanam vijnanam astikam brahmakarma. The brāhmaṇas have certain qualities, just naturally, right? They're meant to be peaceful. They're meant to be self-controlled, austere, pure, tolerant, honest, knowledgeable, and religious, charitable. These or wise, actually wise, and religious. So these are just natural qualities that are found in the Brahmanically minded persons. And then those who are kṣatriyas, they're more inclined to heroic natures, powerful or determined, resourceful, courageous, generous. They have some leadership ability. And then those who are inclined to business, protecting the cows, agriculture. And then those who are better situated to simply assist the other orders and help things function more smoothly. So these qualities, they're natural, as Prabhupada points out here, that the activities of brāhmanas are to control their senses. The kṣatriyas are meant for have a spirit of ruling, and then others who are more inclined to managing the cows and agriculture, and the śūdras are meant to. But whatever the case is, if one simply worships the Supreme Lord and performs his prescribed duty, then his life can be, his or her life, can be very tolerable, manageable. And then, of course, going back to Godhead, that is the main point, that the human form of life is meant for rendering loving service to the Supreme Lord, so that we can go back to Godhead. And that service, as Prabhupada points out here, must be performed without reason, without impediment, and spontaneously, right? That service can't be done for, I'm only doing it for this reason, or I'm only doing it because there's no challenge to it, or that it has to be only when I feel like it. Well, today is not a good day for me, so I can't serve Krishna. No, that's not the mentality that should be there. And in the course of that work, sometimes there may be very as Prabhupada points out here, violence, or there may be necessary challenges. A devotee has to sometimes deal with those, that is for sure. But it can't be done without necessity. Sometimes the question is put forward, as sometimes people ask, even when we're talking with the conditioned souls, the public, they ask about eating meat, and well, you're a vegetarian, you're killing also, but there's no comparison. We can understand that between killing a cow and a vegetable, which is for the most part a fruit, or the vegetable's already dead, or it's a seed and it doesn't actually create violence. So there's no reasonable comparison. But we also know that Krishna prescribes that, as Prabhupada points out here in the purport, that because Krishna is prescribing it, patram pushpam palam toyam, that he's prescribing what we should eat. If he were to prescribe hamburgers, then as devotees we're prepared to do whatever the Supreme Lord recommends or wants. There's a real nice example of Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, who had one follower who was having some challenge. He was smoking. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, "Oh, that's okay." He permitted it. The understanding was to eventually purify that person by association and devotion, that they'll give up those bad habits. But he even accepted that. What to speak of Srila Prabhupada. The devotees who were in the early days were engaged in so many illicit things. And then Prabhupada eventually became more demanding. So the idea is that for Krishna, sometimes violence has to be there. Just as Prabhupada gives the example here of Arjuna. I was listening to a tape yesterday where Srila Prabhupada was sharing he was describing how King Yudhishthira was so upset that so many fathers, sons, brothers, husbands were killed, and the women are now left unprotected. So he was feeling great anxiety. And Prabhupada said that sometimes they accuse us in India that the women are śūdras, that they should only be considered as śūdras. And Prabhupada said, no, that's not the fact. How could a great king be so upset that the men have been now killed, the women are unprotected? He went on and on, back and forth, but it was a very nice explanation of how Vedic culture is concerned for all living beings, and there's no distinction, man, woman, especially though the women, the old, the seniors, the children, the brāhmaṇas, they should be protected. And King Yudhishthira was feeling a great burden from having been involved in this great battle, and now he was lamenting, and then Krishna explains to him further, and Srila Prabhupada explained it further in his lecture. But the idea was that sometimes violence has to be committed, but if it's done for the satisfaction of the personality of Godhead or on his order, then one is properly situated. Because it's only by satisfying the personality of Godhead that one can be freed from those sinful reactions, right? Kechit kevalaya bhakta vasudeva parayana. That it's by devotional service to Krishna, that's the main point. It uproots the weeds of sinful actions with no possibility of them returning. Just as when the sun rises, it dissipates the fog. So by having that element of Krishna satisfying the personality of Godhead, even one has to perform sometimes very socially accepted or not accepted activities, because it's under the guidance of the spiritual master who's representing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is rightly situated. And again, there's many things that we can say about this purport, but I wanted to leave it at that, unless there's a specific question. We were going to go on to read about Rasikananda Prabhu and Jagannathas Babaji. We have some real interesting nectar about their lives. Rasikananda Das Goswami was born in 1512 of the Shaka era in the village of Rohini in the Midnapur district. This village is situated at the confluence of the Subarnataka and Dohanga rivers. His father's name was Achyutananda and his mother Bhavani Devi, who were of the Karana caste, the equivalent of Kayasthas in Bengal. It's described in the Bhakti Ratnakara that Rasikananda was a manjari in Krishna Lila, though his spiritual master Shyamananda had himself been initiated by Hridaya Chaitanya Goswami, who worshipped the Lord in the mood of friendship. He later took shelter of the conjugal mood due to the association of the Raj devotees led by Jiva Goswami. Shyamananda thus initiated Rasikananda into the worship of Radha and Krishna. Rasikananda was also known by the name Rasika Murari. Mother Janava's disciple Nityananda Das wrote in his Prema Vilas that Shyamananda had two principal disciples. One was named Rasikananda and the other Murari. Both of them lived in Ramni. Both Narahari Chakravarti indicates that clearly in Bhakti Ratnakara that both names refer to the same individual. His father lived in the village of Raini, and he was a very wealthy and benevolent landowner who was very strict in his religious practices and took care of his subjects. Rasika Murari, which is Rasikananda, learned to expertly serve his parents, bringing them much satisfaction. Bhakti Ratnakara also notes that he had a devoted wife named Ichamai Devi, and she was from this village, a very well-known village that when the Pandavas were exiled in the forest, they stayed in that same village. Rasika Murari meets Shyamananda Prabhu, his spiritual master. Rasika Murari was anxious to find a spiritual master who could give him guidance on the mystical path. One day while in Gantashila, he went to a solitary place to meditate. He had just entered into a very deep trance when he heard a voice from an unseen source say, "Murari, you must be anxious no longer. Your guru, Sri Shamananda, and you will meet very shortly. Take shelter of him, and your life will be successful." Upon hearing this message, Murari began chanting the name of Shamananda on his beads with joyful enthusiasm. He spent the entire night crying out of eager expectation to meet his guru, until finally at the end of the night he had a dream vision of Shamananda Prabhu, who said to him, "Don't worry any longer, for you will meet me on this very day." At dawn, Rasikananda Murari went on the lookout for his guru when he saw the tall figure of Shamananda approaching him, as effulgent as the sun. Surrounded by disciples like Kishordas, he was dancing in a state of absorption in divine love while chanting the names of Nityananda and Chaitanya. Rasikananda Murari had been waiting anxiously for so long to encounter his guru that he immediately fell down at his feet. Shamananda affectionately lifted him up and embraced him. Then after giving him the Radha Krishna mantra, he offered him up to Chaitanya and Nityananda Prabhus. This whole story demonstrates how we can find a guru through sincere prayers. Rasikananda also, later on, he became a very potent preacher. And it's described that only a true disciple who has dedicated himself completely to his spiritual master is imbued with all the powers of the Guru. Shamananda invested Rasikananda with such spiritual power that he was able to convert many criminals, atheists, Muslims, and other fallen spirit souls to the path of devotional service, bestowing the jewel of prema upon them all. One time, on one occasion, a wicked Muslim tried to silence Rasika Murari by having him attacked by an intoxicated elephant. But Rasikananda was able to transform even the elephant into a disciple and engage him in the service of Vishnu and the Vaishnavas. All who witnessed this amazing event were overwhelmed with astonishment as Rasika Murari's spiritual power and the evil Muslim Zamindar himself came and surrendered to him. The Prema Vilas corroborates the account in the 19th chapter. He delivered many criminals and Muslims. Rasikananda Das Goswami wrote a number of works including Shamananda Shataka, Bhakti Bhagavata Taksha, and Kunja Keli Dwadashaka. It is said that just prior to Rasikananda's disappearance, he went with 7 of his disciples to a village named Bansadaha while traveling to Puri with Nityananda. Rasikananda and his party walked from there to Remuna, chanting kirtan the whole way. When they arrived in the courtyard of the famous Shirchar Gopinath temple, Rasikananda suddenly merged into the body of the Gopinath deity. His disciples also left their bodies in the same place. Rasikananda Murari's flower samadhi and those of his 7 associates are still maintained in the courtyard of the Shirchar Gopinath temple. And you can go there and see it. It's quite moving. An annual festival lasting 12 days is held in Remuna to celebrate his disappearance. Rasikananda Prabhu ki jai. Jagannath Das Babaji's life in Vrindavan. Jagannath Das Babaji, we understand it to be a very important figure in our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And his obeisances read, "I offer my obeisances to you, Jagannath, because you were the foremost Vaishnava of your era. You received the title Vaishnava Sarvabhauma. You are very dear to the Lord, and through your divine vision, you designated the place where Mahaprabhu appeared in this world." So, Jagannath Das Babaji's life in Vrindavan, was born in a respectable family in the Tangal district, in which is today Bangladesh, in around 1780. After taking the Paramahansa, there's a short description of his life, not very much information given about his early life. But taking his Paramahansa Vesha, Jagannath Das Babaji set an exemplary standard of intense bhajan in Navadvip and Vrindavan, so much so that he was accepted by all the Bhajanandi Vaishnavas as their leader. He remained in the world for more than a century, nearly a little over 100 years. While Jagannath Das was engaged in bhajan and braj, a certain professional speaker on the Bhagavatam from Katwa decided to move to Vrindavan to make his living, looking for gold and glory. Even though he gave excellent discourses on the Bhagavad, the renounced Vaishnava showed no interest for them. When he inquired into the reasons that they were not coming to listen to him, Jagannath and the other Vaishnavas told him any discourses on the Bhagavatam given by someone who has other goals in mind cannot be called a true explanation of the Bhagavad. Babaji Maharaj was himself a dedicated and intense Bhajanandi, but he did not believe that disciples who were unqualified and filled with material desires should be allowed to act in any ways detrimental to service to Vishnu. So when he would initiate his disciples, even his sannyasi disciples, he would engage them in taking care of the vegetable garden. That was their service. When an individual engages the senses and sense objects in relation to the body and bodily relations, then attachment for these naturally arises. When we are fixed in the consciousness that our very self, including our body and senses, belong to the Lord, and we engage our senses in the service of the Lord and His devotees, then our feeling of love and possessiveness for Him increase. Jagannath Das Babaji met Bhaktivinoda Thakur for the first time in 1880. Their second meeting took place in the village of Ambajor. On this occasion, they spent the entire night discussing Krishna Katha. Jagannath Das Babaji encouraged Bhaktivinoda Thakur to preach Gaura's name and abode. The Thakur gave the following account of this event in his Sajjanatoshini magazine. Quote, after spending the whole night in the Ekadasi vigil, people from the entire village gathered together at 8 in the morning to go on Nagar Sankirtan through its streets. With the Venerable Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj at the head of the group, they made their way to the Prapana Ashram. It is impossible to describe Babaji Maharaj's ecstatic transformations during this kirtan. Though he is over 100 years old, he dances like a lion, sometimes singing out the couplet, quote, what divine name is that Nitai has brought? He has brought the name to the marketplace and is selling it for the price of faith, end of quote. As Babaji Maharaj sang, he cried and fell to the ground in ecstasy. I then saw something transpire which I had never seen before. All present were affected by his mood. Their eyes filled with tears and their hairs stood on end. Even though they could barely sing, they remained absorbed in the kirtan and danced wildly. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes this event of Mahaprabhu's birth site in his Sajjanatoshini. At 11 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, the 20th of Falgun, 1299 of the Bengali era, in other words, 1892 AD, devotees filled 3 boats on the west bank of the Ganges in Navadvip. The great devotee Jagannath Das Babaji was carried in a palanquin By the time the party reached Mayapur, it was impossible to count the number of people who had gathered. Dwarka Babu and a party of devotees carrying colorful flags were waiting for the renounced Vaishnavas with a joyous kirtan at Mahaprabhu's Janmastan. When all these devotees had gathered in the raised area where Mahaprabhu appeared and started to dance, it was such a wondrous sight as had likely not been seen in Navadvip Dham for nearly 400 years. Later the devotees sat down and after discussing the matter decided that deity service should be established both at the birthplace, known as Shivas Anga, and Jagannathas Babaji Mahashaya proposed that Jagannath and Sachi Devi should be worshipped in one building and Mahaprabhu with Lakshmi Devi and Vishnupriya on the other side in another. On the other hand, deities of the Panchatattva should be consecrated in Shivas Anga. There's also description of how Babaji Maharaj, Jagannathas Babaji Maharaj would sometimes visit Calcutta to visit his dear friend and associate Bhaktivinoda Thakur. On his disappearance, when approaching the end of his sojourn in this world, Babaji Maharaj became hunched and tiny looking. Nevertheless, he could still dance in kirtan, and when he did, he stretched to his full height of 6 feet. When absorbed in the ecstatic mood of kirtan, he would sometimes jump 5 or 6 feet into the air. With his tall figure and long arms, he made people think of Mahaprabhu. Jagannathas Babaji Maharaj's disappearance took place on the Sukla Pratipad of the month of Falgun, Monday, February the 25th, 1895. Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote in his Sajjana Toshani, quote, "At 10 o'clock in the morning in the Bhajan Kutir in Kuladweep, in Navadvip town, the old general of the Vaishnavas went to his eternal abode. Siddha Babaji Mahashaya went to the spiritual world, leaving this world in darkness. Our mundane eyes will no longer be able to behold his ecstatic dancing in kirtan. May he bestow his blessings on us from his place in the eternal abode." Jagannathas Babaji Maharaj ki jai. There's a lot more information, but we'll end there. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.